Sometimes in life, the people you expect to protect you and stand by your side are the very same ones who break you down the most. And that's exactly what happened to me. I was young, ambitious, and finally stepping into the world on my own after years of studying, dreaming, and imagining what life would look like once I finally earned my own living. I thought my first paycheck would bring me joy, independence, and a sense of worth. Instead, it turned into the chain that tied me down in ways I never imagined. When I handed my father my salary slip with a proud smile, hoping he would look at me with the same pride he had when I first got my job, he didn't congratulate me, he didn't pat me on the back, he didn't even smile. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and said in a flat, commanding voice that 80% of that hard-earned money would go directly to my sister and the other 20% would be handed over to him. That simple. At first, I laughed nervously, thinking it was a harsh joke, maybe his way of testing my reaction. But when his gaze didn't soften, when he didn't blink or flinch, when the silence of the room wrapped around his words like iron, I realized he was serious. My chest tightened, my throat went dry, and my heart started pounding because in that moment, all the dreams I had about freedom, about building a future for myself, about living on my own terms, began to crumble before they even had a chance to take root. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him why my life and labor had suddenly been reduced to nothing more than a resource for others. But the weight of his authority silenced me. He was my father, the man I had always respected, the man who had raised me with stern discipline, and yet here he was, telling me without hesitation that my existence as an adult would serve not myself, but everyone around me. And the cruelest part was, I knew he wasn't asking, he was dictating. That moment carved a wound so deep inside me that it shaped everything that followed, every decision I made, every quiet rebellion I dreamed about, every tear I shed behind closed doors, because what was supposed to be the start of my independence turned out to be the beginning of my captivity. From that day forward, life took on a strange heaviness, like I was walking with invisible chains wrapped around my ankles, each step reminding me that my freedom wasn't mine to claim. At work, when colleagues joked about treating themselves with their first paycheck, I forced a smile, nodding along as if I too had bought myself a little gift, maybe a watch or a pair of shoes, when in reality I hadn't even kept a single coin. Every morning I woke up with the alarm, dressed neatly, and joined the busy rush of workers flooding the streets, but inside me there was a gnawing emptiness that refused to leave. I kept replaying my father's words, 80% for your sister, 20% for me, like a harsh drumbeat in my mind. I looked at my sister, who was younger, still studying, still dreaming, and though I loved her dearly, it was impossible not to feel the sting of unfairness. Why did my sacrifice have to be so absolute? Why was my own future considered less important than everyone else's comfort? I wanted to be supportive. I wanted to be a good son and a good brother. But somewhere deep down I began to feel invisible, like I didn't matter at all. Nights became the hardest. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long I could survive like this. I didn't dare to complain openly because my father's authority was law in our house, and defying him would mean more than just harsh words. It would mean disgrace, maybe even being thrown out without support. That fear kept me quiet, and so I kept going to work, kept earning, kept handing over envelopes of money while my own dreams slipped further out of reach. But silence doesn't kill the thoughts in your head, it only makes them louder. I started noticing how everyone else around me seemed to be building something, saving, investing, buying small joys for themselves, while I remained stuck in place, trapped by loyalty, guilt, and duty. And with every passing month, I felt a little piece of myself disappearing, replaced by resentment I was too ashamed to admit, because how could I resent my own family? How could I feel bitter toward my sister, who never asked for this arrangement, or my father, who believed he was simply exercising his right as the head of the house? And yet, the bitterness was there, growing quietly, silently, shaping the person I was becoming. The strange part was how quickly my life began to revolve around this routine, how what should have been unacceptable slowly started to feel like the only reality I knew. Every payday was like a ceremony I dreaded, not because I hated work, on the contrary, I liked my job. I liked the satisfaction of completing tasks, of seeing my name on reports and projects, but because the moment that money landed in my account, I knew it wasn't mine. I'd walk into the house, slip the envelope into my father's hand, and watch him split it, almost casually, as if he were slicing up a loaf of bread. 8 parts would be set aside for my sister, 2 for him, and nothing for me. The first time, it stung like a wound. The second time, it felt humiliating. By the third, fourth, fifth, it was as though my body and mind had separated, performed the act like a robot. Smile weakly, nod when he spoke, and then retreat to my room, where the weight of it pressed down on me like a heavy stone. What haunted me most wasn't just the money, it was the silence that followed. Nobody asked me how I felt. Nobody wondered if I needed anything. It was assumed that my role, my existence, was to serve. And in serving, I was supposed to find fulfillment. I'd catch my reflection in the mirror and see a tired, hollow version of myself, the spark in my eyes fading. My sister would sometimes thank me. Sometimes she'd just accept the money with the innocence of someone who didn't fully understand what it cost me. And though I never blamed her, the distance between us grew. She became a reminder of what I couldn't have. My friends began noticing changes. Too, I stopped joining outings, stopped spending on even the smallest luxuries. And when they teased me about being stingy, I laughed along, unable to explain the truth, because what would they think? Would they pity me? Would they mock me? Or worse, would they look at my father with contempt, and in turn, make me feel disloyal for exposing what happened inside our home? The shame was mine to carry, tucked away in my chest, eating me alive from within. And yet, as the months turned into years, I couldn't shake the thought that if I didn't stand up for myself soon, I'd wake up one day as an older man, with nothing to call my own, no savings, no achievements, just memories of a life spent working for everyone but myself. That thought both terrified me and planted a tiny, dangerous seed. Maybe one day, I would break free. Even if it meant losing everything else, the dangerous seed of rebellion I had buried inside me kept growing with every passing season. And though I tried to suppress it, there were moments it erupted so strongly in my thoughts that I could hardly breathe. I remember one evening in particular, sitting in the corner of my room with the lights off, the soft hum of a ceiling fan above me, and the sound of my father's voice echoing in the living room as he spoke to relatives, about how proud he was of his children. He bragged about my job, about how my sister never had to worry about anything because her brother took care of it all, and even about how the household ran smoothly under his authority. Listening to him, I felt an odd mixture of anger and despair. Anger, because the very sacrifice draining me of my youth and dreams was being paraded as his achievement, and despair, because everyone in that room nodded in approval, as though it were the most natural thing in the world for a son to be stripped of his autonomy in the name of family duty. In their eyes, I wasn't a person. I was a provider, a vessel of income, and nothing more. I wanted to scream into that silence, to burst into the room and shout that I was drowning, that I wanted something for myself, that I deserved the chance to live my own life. But I didn't. I stayed in the shadows, just as I always had, because I knew the explosion wouldn't set me free. It would only burn bridges I wasn't ready to lose. That night, I made myself a quiet promise. I would find a way out. Not immediately, not in a rash decision, but carefully, silently, like water carving its way through stone. And so, I began to live a double life. On the surface, I was the obedient son, the dutiful brother, handing over envelopes of money with a forced smile. But inside, I was slowly mapping out possibilities, thinking of ways I could save, even in tiny amounts. Maybe a few coins slipped away before I got home. Maybe a side project that no one else needed to know about. It was a dangerous game, because if my father discovered it, the backlash would be unbearable. But the thought of continuing as I was felt like a slow death. Every night I'd lie awake imagining another version of me, one who traveled, one who laughed without guilt, one who didn't calculate the cost of every dream in percentages owed to others. And though it felt impossible then, those silent imaginings kept me alive. They were my secret rebellion, my unseen fire, the only proof that somewhere deep inside, I still believed I deserved a life of my own. But the more I tried to hold on to that secret fire, the more life around me tested its strength, as if fate itself wanted to see whether I was truly willing to endure, or whether I would finally snap. There were days when I returned from work so exhausted that even the thought of pretending to smile while handing over my salary felt unbearable. My father's eyes would expectantly rest on me the moment I walked through the door, not with love or curiosity about how my day went, but with the silent demand of authority, and I, like a machine programmed to obey, would deliver what he wanted. My sister, by then, had grown accustomed to her share as well, and though sometimes she muttered a thank you, most times it was just accepted as her due right, and maybe that was what hurt most of all, the normalization of it, the way everyone seemed to believe that my role as the eldest son was to give up everything without question, without complaint, without even the hope of something in return. Yet, even in that suffocating arrangement, cracks began to appear. I noticed myself becoming sharper with my words, less patient with their casual demands, more distant in conversations. Friends who once laughed with me over simple jokes now told me I had changed, that something in me seemed heavier, colder. They didn't know the half of it, of course. They didn't see the countless nights I sat on my bed staring at the little notebook where I secretly scribbled numbers, calculating and recalculating how long it might take to escape if I managed to hide away even the smallest amount each month. Sometimes, I questioned whether my rebellion made me a bad son, whether even thinking of keeping money for myself was a betrayal of my father and sister. That guilt gnawed at me as much as the unfairness did, leaving me in a constant tug-of-war between duty and self-preservation. I wondered how many others lived like me, quietly sacrificing under the weight of family expectations, their own desires withering away like neglected plants. I wondered if I'd ever have the courage to admit aloud that I was suffocating, that I was human too, with dreams that deserved light. Each passing month was another test of endurance, another battle fought silently behind my polite nods and forced obedience, but deep inside, that quiet promise I had made to myself remained alive. One day, I would break free, no matter how impossible it seemed in the moment, and that thought, alone fragile yet powerful, was the only thing keeping me from collapsing completely into the role my father had written for me. The day everything finally came to a head was not some dramatic explosion or grand confrontation, like I had always imagined in my restless nights. It was a quiet breaking point, a moment so ordinary on the surface that no one but me would ever realize it was the turning of an entire life. I had just received another paycheck, and as usual, I placed the envelope in my father's hand. He split it into the familiar fractions, 8 for my sister, 2 for himself, none for me. But this time, as his fingers moved over the crisp notes, something inside me refused to bend. It was like a switch flipped, a sudden clarity flooding my mind, and for the first time in years, I heard my own voice in my head louder than his commands. My hands trembled, my chest tightened, but my lips formed words I had rehearsed silently for months. I can't do this anymore. The room went still. My father's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing in disbelief, as if the very air had betrayed him. My sister froze, confusion and fear mingling in her gaze. I knew the storm that was coming, the accusations of disrespect, of ingratitude, of betrayal. But in that moment, I wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time, I felt something heavier than fear. Dignity, I explained, my voice shaking but steady, enough to be heard, that I had dreams too, that I had given years of my life without question, that I loved my family, but I was not a machine to be emptied at will. My father's anger was immediate, harsh words laced with disappointment and rage. His pride wounded that I would dare challenge him. But I didn't back down. I had already lived the worst years of silence. Nothing he said could chain me more than I had been chained already. My sister, to my surprise, stepped in, her voice softer, her eyes wide, realizing perhaps for the first time how much I had carried for her sake. That night, the house shook with arguments, with tears, with accusations, but when the dust settled, something had changed forever. I had finally spoken, and there was no going back. It didn't solve everything instantly. It didn't make my father suddenly understand or undo the years of sacrifice, but it cracked the walls of oppression that had caged me for so long. From that point on, I began carving a life for myself, step by step, with shaky hands and a weary heart, but with the strength I had never known I had. And though the scars of those years will always remain, they remind me of a truth I had to learn the hardest way possible. You cannot live your life entirely for others, no matter who they are, if it means burying yourself in the process. Love demands sacrifice, yes, but not self-erasure. My father's command might have written the first chapters of my adulthood, but I chose to write the rest, and in those pages, I finally found something I thought I had lost forever: myself.